Hi class, this is Mr. Kinzer and this is part 4 to the ancient history tape for L28, lesson 28. And with this tape I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the Etruscan influence and then have you take some notes here. Just add these to the notes that you've been taking on Rome. So here's the Etruscans. And we've talked about them being a very important tribe that influenced Rome. We're going to see why as we take a few notes. So the Etruscans, being from Phoenicia, just settled north of Rome when they came to Italy. So they sailed over, but originally they were from the Palestine area, which was that area that Israel is today occupying. And they pushed south from Palestine into Egypt. And there they were defeated by Ramses III, the Egyptian pharaoh. So they were defeated as they were moving south. Why were they moving south? I don't know. But they perhaps were moving south because of famine or food supply or maybe they had just were aggressive and they were moving down toward Egypt, but there they were defeated. And they were famous for using a double-edged sword. And this sword was interesting, and it could take a double edge because it was made of bronze. So here's this bronze sword, which is made of copper and tin. And of course, the chemical symbol, the element tin, is SN. So you could just remember copper and SN, or copper and tin. So it's an alloy, and this made the metal very hard. So it was able to take two edges. And they were also, because the metal was hard, they could make a longer blade. So they had a bigger use of that blade. In other words, they could stab better with this sword. They could reach out further and stab better, and it would hold its edge longer. So we see that because of this defeat and now sailing to Italy, they had been forced away from the Palestine area, the Egyptian area, and they sailed to Italy really trying to find a new home. So, of course, when you sail westward, you're sailing from the center of civilization out kind of on the frontier, kind of like in our country. People would go to the west. They'd move west because there was opportunity, but it was a frontier. So it was a little wild, lawless. Same thing here. So they come to Italy, and of course they had to push people out of that area that they settled there, which was just north of Rome. So they moved from a desert to a rich farmland, and the desert area, of course, they were traders. They went to the ocean. They sailed and they traded, but now they're in this rich farmland of northern Italy. And so they began growing wine, and of course Italy's famous for its wines, it's famous for its breads and the grains that it grows, and just lots of agricultural produce, lots of produce that they're able to produce there in that northern area. It's well watered, there's good amount of rain, it's a very sunny climate, and so they're really doing well. And so what they do is they trade. They go out trading in wine and wheat, and they also become wealthy through this. So because they're wealthy, they're a very stable economy, they start developing art. So one of the things that you see with different cultures is they tend to develop art. They tend to have painting or mosaics, or they develop architecture, any of these areas, because they've got some time on their hands. They're not always farming, or they're not just survival mode. But because of that stability, they become very able to do art and take time for it. We also want to note that there were some unique things the Etruscans accomplished as well. One thing is they wore togas. They kind of kicked off the idea of wearing a sheet around your body. It gives your limbs a lot of movement. It was very, very light, and it was a pretty warm climate that they lived in, northern Italy. But another unique thing was how they buried people. They had unique burial customs. Now, one of the things they did was the body was placed inside a coffin, and the coffin was very decorative. And they called this real decorative coffin a sarcophagus, And it was made with wood, and it was overlaid with ornamentation. So often it would have metal inlay, it would have a lot of paint and color to it, and so a lot of ornamentation. They decorated this sarcophagus. So it wasn't just a coffin, which can tend to be small and just decorated, maybe a polished wood, but it was now a sarcophagus, very ornate, had a lot of inlay, and they might have even gotten this idea from their influence, the way that they had invaded Egypt, and so way back when they had run into the Egyptians and seen the tombs, and probably had some exposure to the mummies and the mummy cases, the coffins that the Egyptians used. This might have really affected them. I'm not sure, to be honest, but I think it probably did. That's my thinking. So the Etruscans went into decline about 700, about the time Rome is starting to become stronger and stronger. About 700, their decline started, and it went until about 500 BC. In 500 BC, and they'd been dominating the Latin tribe. The Latin tribe, of course, is the Roman tribe, Latin, the Latin tribe. And the Romans there in 509, they overthrew the Etruscan rule. So they threw off the rule of the Etruscans, and the Romans then took over. The Etruscans, it's kind of a switch. The Etruscans dominated the Romans and ruled them, and now Rome throws off the Etruscan rule. And this all happens, this is kind of a big marker point, 509 BC. Rome is becoming now an important power. Now the Etruscans, getting back to them, I want to say one of the big things they're noted for is naval power, because they were noted traders, and they were Phoenicians at the core. That was their background. And you guys remember Phoenicia was a city on a coast near Lebanon, over on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And so they were great sailors. The Phoenicians sailed all over the place, all over the Mediterranean, founded Carthage, great trading city, cities in Spain, even sailing out into the Atlantic. But this naval heritage that they had, being Phoenicians, they are now, and were at that point, shipping into the western Mediterranean Sea, and had really total control of the Tyrrhenian Sea. The Tyrrhenian Sea is the part of the sea that abuts Gaul, southern France, and also over to the northern part of Italy today. So the island of Corsica, the island of Sardinia, and that northern area near what will later become Genoa, a great trading city in northern Italy. Columbus comes from Genoa about 2,000 years later. And so total control of the Tyrrhenian Sea. So when Rome takes them over, now Rome steps into that vacuum. Rome is now starting to become a naval power. So Rome had always been on the land, and now Rome is moving more toward developing a navy. So here's their baby navy, so to speak, The baby navy Romans, the Roman baby navy, is beginning to form and take shape. Now, at this time in our video, I want you to go ahead and turn to Caesar's The Conquest of Gaul. Now, often this is called Caesar's Commentaries on the Gallic War. So it's got a couple different titles. I like The Conquest of Gaul because it's just that. Caesar is going to conquer France in this book that you're reading. And you should be up to about page 83, I believe. So your assignment was to read pages 58 to 83. But we're going to look at the beginning of book 1. This was on page 28. And this section is book 1. And we're going to read different sections. I'm going to be putting notes down. I'd like you to listen and follow along and to underline in your book, because it's important for you to, as you learn and as you read, to underline different things. And there's important ideas here that kind of define what the Roman Empire was starting to look like as Caesar and different armies went out and they conquered areas. Probably the most famous account is this one that Julius Caesar wrote. So Caesar wrote this book to really be a report to the Romans of what he had accomplished, but it was also a promotion of his ability because he was very ambitious. So some of you may remember William Shakespeare's play, Julius Caesar and Cassius and Brutus trying to decide whether they would ambush Caesar and assassinate him. And Cassius is constantly telling Brutus, he's ambitious. Well, Cassius was 100% right. I just want to tell you. And Caesar wrote this book really to promote himself so he'd become well known among the Romans as a great general and as a great Roman. And so he does it to really self-promote himself. Let's take a look at the first paragraph, book 1, page 28. You'll notice they're numbered paragraphs, so we're at number 1. And here's this famous line, maybe the most famous line in all of Latin literature, is what Caesar writes here. And I'm going to be sending you several map sheets this week, and I'll also be sending you the quiz. The quiz will be a written quiz, and you download it and print it out, and then you would always just go ahead and mail me the quiz. And that'll be on your sheet as well, but let me just read this one section. You follow along. Number 1, Gaul comprises 3 areas, inhabited respectively by the Belgae, the Aquitani, and a people who call themselves Celts, though we call them Gauls. All of these have different languages, customs, and laws. The Celts are separated from the Aquitani by the river Garonne, from the Belgae by the Marne and Seine. The Belgae are the bravest of the 3 peoples, being furthest removed from the highly developed civilization of the Roman province, least often visited by merchants with enervating luxuries for sale, and nearest to the Germans across the Rhine, with whom they are continually at war. So we'll pause there just to write a few things down that we want you to remember here. Remember what he's saying. It's divided into 3 areas. So Gaul can be divided, and I'm going to just pause for just a moment here. So Caesar is reporting that Gaul is divided into 3 areas. It is occupied by the Belgae, the Celti, and the Aquitani. Those are the 3 tribes. Now I've drawn a quick little sketch, and you're going to get a map that's kind of about the same way. It's you'll get it as an enclosure or an attachment this week. But let's go ahead and look at. He says in this that the Celti are the largest group. They're the largest of the 3 tribes, and often they're the ones that we call the Gauls. So these are really the the Gauls. And this is the area of the Celti. This would be this area between the Matrona River, which is up here on this this northern area. I'm going to kind of trace it. Here's the Matrona River. North of the Matrona River, we have the Belgae. And of course, Belgium sits right up here, just north of France. This almost is a perfect picture of France, the way we've drawn it here. It basically is the country, today's France. And then down here, we have this, in the southern part, there's a river, the Garonne River. And down here, the Aquitani live. So we have the Aquitani, the Celti, and the Belgae. And we can see that that they have particular regions that they inhabit. And now, I'm, like I said, going to send you a map, and so this is going to be a lot easier for you to follow, but I want to let you know you do have a map in the back of your book. It's in the appendix back there, and you can see basically the same area. Now, one thing you do need to take note of is that the Romans have a province in France, in Gaul, and they call it the Roman province. And of course, just to the east is Italy. So right over here, I'm going to draw Italy in, and of course, over here is what? Genoa, today's Genoa, and then the Italian peninsula kind of goes down this way. So this is Italy, and of course, the northern part of Italy is defined by the Alps mountains. And we have a secondary mountain range, the Jura Mountains, which we'll be talking about as well. And the Jura are really located just to the west of Lake Geneva. Now, Lake Geneva sits right in this little area here, and today this would be Switzerland. So the area, there's Lake Geneva, and then the town of Geneva sits right on the end of that lake. So I'm going to put a G down there for Geneva. It's hard to see that G, sorry about that. But there's Geneva. And then the Rhone River flows out of Geneva and then down to the Mediterranean. So there's the Rhone. Now this is going to be really important to understand. The Rhine River flows north out of Italy, and it goes kind of to the north, actually flowing sort of from the north of Lake Geneva north to the English Channel. And of course today Belgium sits where that big B is, and then we also have Holland, or the Netherlands, which the Rhine flows through. And we have Amsterdam, this huge city, biggest seaport in Europe, is on that Rhine. So we're looking at Europe when it was just tribal here. It's kind of interesting to see what happens with Caesar's, with his story. Let's continue, and I'm going to read this section I just did in Latin, and I'm going to be giving you this sheet, and you can see the Latin and then see a translation. But let me read the Latin. This is very famous. Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres. And that's probably pretty easy just to see that all Gaul is divided into three parts. Gallia est omnis divisa in partes tres. Quarum unam inculet Belgae, alium Aquitani, tertium ipsorum lingua Celti, nostra Galli appellantur. He omnes lingua institutis legibus inter se differunt. Gallos ab Aquitani Garuna flumen, a Belgi matrona, et sequani dividit. Now, one thing about Latin is the end of each sentence is where the verb goes. So it's not like English, where the verb is inserted somewhere in the sentence. It's always at the end in Latin. So as you read the Latin, you're going to read Gaul is all divided into parts three. Of these, in one live the Belgae, in another the Aquitani, in the third those who in their language are Celts. They are called our Gauls. These all in tongues, customs, laws, between themselves differ. The Gauls from Aquitania, Garonne River, from the Belgae, the Matrona, and Sequana divide. So it's saying that the Gauls, here are the Celts on this map, are divided from the Belgae by the Matrona. Here's the Matrona, this river. I'm going to put a little M there. And then, of course, the Aquitani are divided by the river in the south here, the Garonne River, and they have it, Garuna is the Latin. So I'm just putting a G on the river down here. So we have these three areas, and here's where a lot of the action is going to happen, right here inside this circle, because a tribe, the Helvetii, which are the Switzerland tribe, is going to try to migrate, and it's going to try to pick a spot to migrate so they can get over here into Gaul. But they're going to try to march across the southern Roman province. Let's go ahead and draw this province in. The province, called the Roman province, is kind of comes across this way and extends up to take up kind of to this point where Lake Geneva is, and then it extends down and across the Garonne River down into this area. So this area here is the Roman province. And guess what? The Romans do not want these tribes coming across Roman land. We're going to see why. So let's resume here with paragraph 2. Paragraph 2, we're on page 28. The foremost man among the Helvetii in rank and wealth was Orgetorix. In the consulship of Marcus Messala and Marcus Piso, 61 BC, he was induced by the hope of obtaining royal power to organize a conspiracy of noblemen and persuaded his countrymen to emigrate en masse, telling them that they were the best fighters in Gaul and could easily conquer the whole country. They listened the more readily to his proposal because their territory is completely hemmed in by natural barriers. On the one side, by the Rhine, a very broad and deep river, which is the frontier between them and the Germans. On the other side, by the high mountain range of the Jura, between them and the Sequani. On the third, by the Lake of Geneva and the Rhone. Okay, so if we look at this map, we can see that here's the land area of the Helvetii. They're up here, and I'm going to kind of shade in. They're between the Rhine River. They're hemmed in. The German tribes are up here. They're to the north of the Rhine. So they can't really go anywhere that direction. They're hemmed in down here by the Lake Geneva, and then over to the west by the Jura Mountains. So here they sit, kind of in this area here, and they need more land. This was what he was convinced. And this is Orgetorix, actually. And so you want to remember his name. Now, in this section, it mentions that the bravest of those three peoples, the Belgae, Celtae, and Aquitani, were the Celts. Were the Belgae, and that's because they were farthest removed, they were least often visited, and they were the closest to the Germans. Now we're looking at the Helvetii, who are a little bit south of the Belgae. They're braver than the rest of the Celts, it says here, and they have daily contact with the Germans. So they're constantly trying to keep the Germans out of Switzerland, or Helvetia, or they're actually going over and invading the Germans across the Rhine River. So the greatest man of the Helvetii is Orgetorix, and in 61 BC, he persuaded everyone through his craft. He was a persuader, kind of a politician. So he persuaded them all to emigrate or move en masse. Okay, meaning the entire tribe is going to move. And we see this right there on the bottom of page 28. And they are cooped up, they need room to grow. So he does this in a very interesting way. Let's look at paragraph 3, page 28. It says, impelled by this feeling and by the influence of Orgetorix, they determined to prepare for emigration by buying up all the draught cattle and wagons they could, sowing as much land as possible in order to secure an adequate supply of corn for the journey, and establish peaceful and friendly relations with their neighbors. So, to prepare, it says that they bought up cattle, they got wagons, they prepared, they sowed much corn on their land, and thirdly, they prepared for 2 years. They put Orgetorix in charge. He was put in charge of this whole effort. Now we're going to learn that he undertakes a mission as we read a little bit more. Let's drop down a couple lines. We're about in the middle of page 29. Orgetorix was put in charge of the arrangements, and he undertook a mission to the neighboring people, in the course of which he persuaded a Sequanian named Casticus, whose father, Amantalotus, had been king of his tribe for many years and been honored by the Senate with the title Friend of the Roman People, to seize the royal power which his father had held before him. He also induced the Aeduan Dumnorix, Divicasius's brother, who at that time held the chief magistracy of his tribe and enjoyed great popularity, to make a similar attempt and to give him his daughter in marriage. So we see a couple things. You should underline that section or somehow mark it, because there's 3 things that Orgetorix does in the area of diplomacy. So one of the things that he does is he goes on this mission, and he persuaded the Sequanian, that's Sequanian, Casticus, so you ought to know that name. Casticus is a Sequanian. He persuades him to seize the power in his tribe. And then he goes to Dumnorix, and Dumnorix was very popular in the Aeduan tribe, capital Aeduan tribe. And he gave Dumnorix his daughter, so has kind of an ally here. He gives Dumnorix his daughter in marriage. So what he accomplishes, and that's kind of the key thing, is these 3 men now are allies. So this is something that you see that he very craftily does. He forms allies with the Aeduans through Dumnorix, and with the Sequanians through Casticus, and he does it through giving his daughter in marriage, and he does it to encourage both of those men to seize power in their tribes. So he's very crafty. We're going to stop this tape right here and finish up on the next tape.